Second and Third John. Well, how did the early church spread its message? Again, back in the day before radio, before social media, before even the printed page, really. These two little letters, Second and Third John, I think will be a good example or a good signpost for how the story of that society would have worked and how the gospel could spread. There's, as I had mentioned before, the authorship of the Gospel of John, the letters of John, and the book of Revelation. They're all associated with the title or the author of John. But of course, John's a very common name, and it's not really until farther into church history that the apostle, John the Apostle, is given basic credit for all 5 books. Early on, and again, even if you just look at the text, it seems that, and here's my opinion, that John the Apostle, that would be the apostle of Jesus, John the son of Zebedee, a fisherman from Capernaum, he is responsible for the Gospel of John with the beloved disciple, and that would be where we would see his mark when it comes to a book. In the book of Revelation, the author identifies himself as John, and he takes several steps. We'll do this next time when we start the book of Revelation. He takes several steps to not identify himself as an apostle. He'll talk about himself as a seer or a prophet, which should be an Old Testament concept of someone who God comes to and gives information, a fellow sufferer, something like that, or a companion, he'll call himself. So the fact that he doesn't call himself an apostle and seems to distance himself from the apostolic band has led others, and myself as well, to think of John, the writer of Revelation, to be a man who has been exiled to the island of Patmos for the rest of his life. It was a penal colony, and he was given a special revelation about Jesus, and that becomes the book of Revelation. But well known to the churches of Asia Minor. Then we have the 3 letters of John. The title John, or the name John, appears in the title of these books, and it always has. It's always been associated with the books themselves, the title. And that's where you see the word John, the name. And he's in 2nd and 3rd John, as you read today, he calls himself the elder or the old man. And again, without making any reference to being an apostle or a man on Patmos. So my guess is, and again, this falls into line with a lot of discussion, a lot of academic kind of discussion and vocabulary discussions and things like that, and stylistic issues, that this is another John. This is a third person who is called John in the story. And he seems to be, as we read in 1 John, a man who was dedicated to the Old Testament model of sapiential wisdom. And he is speaking about, again, as we saw last time, the life of the early church and how it worked. Well, these 2 letters, 2nd and 3rd John, the 5th verse of 2nd John uses the singular lady, you lady. So 2nd John is written by a man named John to a woman, and we don't have a name. And then 3rd John, verse 1, mentions Gaius. And again, we don't know of a Gaius. There's several Gaiuses in the New Testament, but we have no reason to think he is the same as any other Gaius. But just seems to be a man that, again, draws. And both of these are one page, one piece of papyrus letters that are interesting, again, in the story of how the New Testament church, as I began this time, how it spread. And I think this is, again, good evidence that as Jesus has ascended to a place of lordship, this new humanity, this Jew-Gentile joining of forces in the worship of Jesus, absolutely new in the history of mankind, again, when it comes to a religious ideal, and that is a group of people who are not bound by ancestral traditions, but are bound by simply the worship of the same deity. That was a challenge, and wouldn't you know it that these 2 letters, as short as they are, probably were a couple in examples of, or giving an example of the hundreds of kind of letters that would be about this very issue, when it comes to what Christians talked about, this is the issue in the New Testament, how Jews and Gentiles could still act either Jewish or Gentile and yet combine in their worship of one Jesus. Well, 2 John verse 9, he mentions this to this woman. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. A couple things there. Again, noticing how Jesus and Yahweh are not the same person. Yahweh has designated to Jesus all of his authority and glory and honor, and yet the argument from John is that, and he's talking to this woman, that a person who that lives by and believes in the teaching of Jesus, and I take that to mean following what Jesus taught while he was on earth. If you follow the teachings of Jesus, you know then you are following the Creator God of the Old Testament, the God of Israel. Again, what did Jesus teach? I think what he's trying to say is, very quickly, when you come to this idea of Jews and Gentiles coming together, remember how Christ is the author and finisher of our faith. He's the one that talked to the woman at the well. He's the one that touched the lepers and ate grain on a Sabbath, offending the Pharisees that wanted Torah to rule and not God himself. So I think those when we hear of the teachings of Jesus, he was all about the lost person, the person who was considered outside the family. They were the ones that Jesus drew into the family because of their love of Yahweh. Again, it doesn't mean that all lost people can just consider themselves right with God. No, as a person loved Yahweh, it doesn't matter then what their social position was or ancestral background, they get to be part of the family of Abraham. So that's what it means when we're talking about the teachings of Jesus. And of course, what was happening in 2 John, we have a specific instance in verse 10. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, do not take him into your house. So here's the issue, and it's going to come up in both of our stories here. Don't let them come into your house if they're not believing what Jesus said about this early church situation. On the other hand, very quickly, we have this example in 3 John verses 3 and 5. It gave me great joy to have some brothers come and tell about your faithfulness, Gaius, to the truth, and how you continue to walk in the truth. Dear friend, you are faithful in what you are doing for the brothers, even though they are strangers to you. Again, here's what's happening, and this is back in the days before you had Hotel Sixes, right? That when you would come into a town on a business trip or just traveling, getting from place to place, you had to stay with existing families and in homes. And so what was happening is, apparently, Gaius was allowing into his home strangers, and you can tell that as you read 3 John, he is committed to the very thing that, again, this lady is as well. But the idea that Jew and Gentile doesn't matter who you are, you get to be part of my home because you have the same belief in Jesus. So when the question of how the gospel spread in the early church, I think it was a matter of word of mouth, clearly. It wouldn't be people witnessing on the street corners, right? It would be people moving through town, and often people staying in homes and watching you worship Jesus without an icon, without an idol, and asking, how do you do that? What is this this resurrected person that you believed in or are believing in? How do you worship him? And that would be how the early church spread really in this area. This would be in 1st through 3rd John seems to be letters written in the Turkey area. And so that's a good example how the gospel would have spread in that area.